People don't want to be alone. That much you can say for sure. People seek out others for fun, connection, or something more. And while dating apps and online forums can truly forge lasting relationships, they can also connect people who should never have met.
Of course I was worried about her. I was absolutely terrified at what had just happened to her, but...
Today, we will examine some of these fatal connections through the clips and footage left behind, interviews, statements, evidence, and more. If you're lucky, you'll go on an online dating app and meet someone wonderful, or you'll have a good time, and that'll be that. Unfortunately for these 5 stories, their dates made the news, something you never want to do. Keep watching because you won't want to miss what we have coming up next. When you're somewhere strange in a new country surrounded by new people, many people search for something fun to do, someone fun. Truthfully, maybe there is something exciting about the potential of someone you never have to see again because you'll be across the country or even across oceans. But is it worth the risk? Warriena Wright was working in Australia from her home country of New Zealand. This is where she connected with Gable Toste on the popular dating app Tinder. Gable had long since been recording his conquests, boasting an impressive record with women in his online communities. He claimed he wanted to hook up with as many women as possible, noting that it boosted his confidence. He had audio recordings of every date, including the fated outing with Warriena Wright. Things started usually. They went out for drinks before returning back to his home. However, things quickly soured between the young couple. Warriena seemingly became more inebriated than she could handle. She was later determined to have a blood alcohol concentration of 0.156 at death. Around 1:29 a.m., things had become violent. Toste began to complain about her aggressive behavior, blaming himself for giving her so much alcohol. They tried to defuse things multiple times, but eventually, things seemed to come to a head. According to Toste, she attacked him with a telescope before eventually leading off to the balcony.
You think you can hit me and I'll just fall down like in the movies? Huh? You don't understand, do you? Let go of it. Let go. Let go. Let go.
Some of the recordings include Toste claiming if you fell off the balcony, you'd undoubtedly die, as well as him later saying, "This is bullshit. You're lucky I haven't chucked you off the balcony." Neighbors reported hearing screams from Warriena above, and one neighbor even saw her legs dangling from the balcony, only to not be able to respond quickly enough as the young woman plummeted to her death. At one point, the recording catches the sound of the balcony door opening, with Wright repeatedly begging Toste to let her go home. while Warriena had fallen to her death. Tosse went out for a slice of pizza. In an interview several years later, Gable explained the thought process. He was terrified of it looking like he had killed her and didn't want to attract attention.
I ate. I had been wandering around the streets, confused, extremely drunk and in shock, and I needed to clear my head and sober up. And so I found a place that had some food.
So why didn't you go out on the balcony to check to see if she was okay?
Instinctively, I knew that if I ran out there and somebody saw me looking over the edge and she had actually fallen all the way, it would look like, it would not look good. It would look like I had forced her over or something.
So you were worried about what it would look like for you?
Of course I was worried about her. I was absolutely terrified at what had just happened to her.
Instead of phoning emergency services, he called his lawyer, and when his lawyer didn't pick up, he phoned his father.
You were so deeply concerned, Gable, that from her death scream to the next event, which was you calling your lawyer, was 35 seconds.
I froze on the spot and I thought, I need to do whatever is the most rational thing to do at the moment. I need advice.
It was a lengthy trial that questioned whether Gable had killed her or if he'd simply forced her to act in fear, and the woman had merely slipped. The question was simple. Was it Gable's fault if she tried to climb down? If she was afraid, could he be blamed? In the end, Gable was found not guilty. The jury, though briefly upset by the possibility of a mistrial due to one juror posting on Instagram, had reached a unanimous decision. While the circumstances surrounding Warriena's death were unfortunate, they weren't opaque enough for things to be ruled murder or manslaughter. The ordeal took a solid 26 months to settle before the family could finally return home and adequately process the loss of their daughter. Sometimes, quick overseas fun can be just that. Just fun between two adults, and we can leave it at that. Unfortunately, Tinder has a way of connecting people in good and bad habits, and there's no real way to know which. Going on a date is exciting. It could be a prospective new chapter in your life or a fun time with someone you connect with. Lauren Smith-Fields would never know which her date with Matthew LaFontaine would end up being, because by 6:30 a.m. the next day, she'd be pronounced dead, unresponsive in bed. Most information given to the family was received from an incident report by the Bridgeport Police Department. The 37-year-old date, a white man, met Miss Smith-Fields on Bumble. She invited him to her apartment after the two had talked for a few days. They ate, drank, played games, and watched a movie. It was all straightforward, run-of-the-mill date things. She briefly met with her brother outside before returning to finish the film with LaFontaine. As she drifted off to sleep, Matthew carried her to bed, and the two fell asleep. At 3 a.m., according to him, she was still sound asleep, snoring in bed. 6:30 a.m., however, would tell another story. She was turned on her side, with blood coming from her nose, and breathing had seemingly long since ceased. Immediately calling 911, he was advised to begin chest compressions, but that was too late. She was pronounced dead at the scene. From the perspective of first responders, this was open and shut. He was shaken in a state of shock. The cause of death, ultimately, was ruled an accidental overdose due to a mix of alcohol and fentanyl in her system. What could have been a simple story is so much more than that. The family of Lauren Smith Fields didn't feel as though a proper investigation was done by the police. In fact, the deceased's family hadn't even been notified. Chantel Fields, her mother, was concerned when she hadn't heard from her daughter. Going to her apartment, there was a number on the door. If you're looking for Lauren, call this number. The landlord delivered the news to the grieving mother, forwarding the number of the detective on their daughter's case. This is how they learned of their daughter's passing and the date that ended everything, though the detective told them not to worry about the man who had been there as he was a really nice guy. Soon after, the police refused to cooperate with the family, telling them to stop contacting police for updates, of which there never seemed to be any.
We want all the people of Bridgeport to be treated fairly and equally under the law. That didn't happen here, and everyone listening to the story needs to know that Lauren Smith Fields wasn't given the treatment that she should have been given.
It was almost as though no one was looking into it. The slow response has renewed a conversation on missing white woman syndrome. This phrase was coined by PBS anchor Gwen Ifill nearly 20 years ago and describes the attention paid to white women appearing to be in harm's way. All the while, black women in the same situations often find themselves ignored.
I call it the missing white woman syndrome. If there's a missing white woman, we're going to cover that every day.
The family believed this to be another example of institutionalized racism and a lack of care for black lives.
I just could not believe that my baby sister was gone. Somebody who I love, somebody who I protected, somebody who I've been around my whole entire life. Like I literally held her when she was born.
With a renewed investigation and a fresh team, the family hopes to clarify their grief.
Because we don't want this, that it's not just about Lauren. It's about every girl that could potentially go through something like this. We don't ever want this to happen to anybody. I don't want nobody to feel this pain.
For the time being, a well-loved, bubbly young woman was lost. While no amount of social media attention can bring the grieving family and their daughter back, it can help bring light to other crimes that may have fallen victim to the same lack of awareness.
It's really important for us as a community to stand behind them and to let them know that we stand with them.
Before I'm a state rep, I'm a dad, and no parent should have to endure the pain that Lauren Smith Fields and Brenda Lee Rawls families have experienced.
The last thing you'd expect when meeting a date is to be imprisoned. Heidi Carter was arrested in 2021 after one such situation, or at least her part in it. Meeting on a popular LGBTQ+ dating app in October of 2021, Carter invited Sam Ivey and his partner into her home. The House of Horrors, as it was, would be guised as any other safe meetup. The three adults drank, did drugs, and engaged in consensual acts together. When Heidi's partner, Carrie Hammond, came home, things took a sharp turn for the worse. He walked in on the three, grabbed a baseball bat, and began to attack Ivy, eventually ending in the man strangling him to death with a belt. On the other hand, the woman had to endure her assault afterwards with a gun pointed at her, as Carter would be heard encouraging his behavior. The ordeal ended with a bang. When Carter hired a cleaning lady to come into their home, she happened upon the body of the restrained woman and informed authorities. They arrived at the house and Hammond, holding something that looked like a gun, left aggressively.
You had officers who were staged all along the front of the home, using things such as, police vehicles as barricades and cover. There were some trees out there that officers were behind as well. This is an open doorway right here. They can actually see movement where somebody is kind of going in and out of the doorway, and they are telling him, we see you, come out, show us your hands. They're giving him commands, come out. I mean, it happens very fast. He comes out quickly, and there are officers in front of him. He comes out and he doesn't show his hands. He has his hands out in front and he is holding an object out and pointing it. This is a shooter stance.
As it turns out, the gun in his hand was just a piece of plastic and metal shaped to look like a firearm, and perhaps he had left it like that in hopes that officers would assist him in suicide. While Hammond escaped prosecution and death, Carter was left behind. With a 65-year sentence, Heidi was found guilty of all charges after a lengthy 10-hour deliberation. She was charged with murder, 2 counts of intimidation with a weapon, sexual assault, 2 counts of criminal confinement, assisting a criminal, and abuse of a corpse. The sentencing was given after impact statements were read in court. Not Ivy's ex-wife was brought to the stand. She talked about these attacks and her ex-husband's subsequent murder robbed her child and grandchild of a father and grandfather.
As the clock ticked on, it felt very reminiscent of last time, and I was getting very nervous. I was worried. So it was definitely a relief when they came back with a guilty verdict of all 6 counts. I mean, I just am beside myself.
The still living victim also testified, explaining how her life was completely destroyed. She wasn't sure when she would be able to recover. Carter plans to file an appeal for the end sentence. She claims to have been coerced into her involvement and only helped Hammond to appease him. During the trial, the defense asked the judge to consider her mental health and substance abuse issues before giving the sentence. In contrast, the prosecution asked for the maximum sentences on all charges to be served consecutively for the particularly sadistic case.
There's never a murder that's not horrible, but the sadisticness, if that's a word, of this case is just really extreme, and I think it called for the extreme sentence that you got.
Guilty but mentally ill was the plea for Ethan Hunsaker, 26, who ended the life of Ashlin Black in May 2020. She was stabbed, choked to death, and killed by a Tinder date gone wrong. Around 3:19 a.m. on the 24th of May, police from Layton, Utah, received a call from Hunsaker informing them that he'd murdered someone inside his home.
We have a male on the line saying he wants to die and that he killed someone. He doesn't know who he had killed, but that it occurred at that address.
He asked the police to come and kill him, supposedly for what he had done. Officers found a lifeless young woman, Ashlin Black, with multiple stab wounds. Though attempts were made to resuscitate her, there was no success. She was pronounced dead at the scene. Unlike many other cases, the police were not tasked with piecing together a timeline of events from that night. Hunsaker was more than willing and would fully confess what he had done. The two had met the night before on the dating app Tinder. They went to a local bar together and Ashlin returned to his apartment with him. It had been a perfectly normal date. The two had sex and went to sleep. Something changed for Hunsaker in the middle of the night, and it became a fast horror story. He choked her when he found she was lying on his arm before using a spring-assisted pocket knife, stabbing the young woman around 5 to 10 times. In the end, Hunsaker would not get the police-assisted suicide that he requested. Officers took him in handcuffs, and he would be charged with first-degree murder and ordered to be held without bail. Immediately, Ashlin's story took social media by storm, though not in the ways one might expect. Instead of expressing condolences towards the departed's family, the victim blaming turned towards the victim, as if she had deserved it for meeting with someone she barely knew. The attacker had always planned for this to happen. Hunsaker's confession included the truth that no altercation, argument, or truly triggering event caused the violence. He simply wanted to kill her. And after a psychological evaluation, they knew this to be true.
But Hunsaker's attorney, who had now the psychological evaluation done, they were sort of looking into his mental health, had decided that he wanted to meet with his client's family and go over the plea bargain, although there isn't really much of a plea bargain on the table. There's a lot of talk that he went into a real dark place after the mother of his child left him. His employer said that he had been great. He'd been really very, very good employee. Started having problems with the female employees there at the paving company that he worked. Made threats about harming a woman. Finally hooked up with this really cute kid, this Ashlin Black, and it ended just tragically. But I don't see any way that the county attorney's office is going to give this kid a break at all. And they have a confession, as you heard from the Layton PDs.
Some relief would come to the family in the form of a guilty but mentally ill plea from their daughter's attacker. The family claimed not to want to go through a trial, though hearing directly from the defendant what had happened had been emotionally jarring.
Anytime someone's pressuring you to do something that you're not comfortable with or to go somewhere that's unfamiliar, people would definitely be best advised to be cautious and careful with how they proceed.
Hunsaker serves as an unfortunate warning for those in online dating spaces. Someone charming online might not be quite what you would expect in person. If you made it this far, consider subscribing to our channel before moving on to today's final clip. We post 2 new videos a week showcasing real-world dangers and crime, keeping you informed about what's happening out there, and maybe even giving you the ways to keep yourself safe. Make sure to enable post notifications to stay updated with our latest releases. If you're enjoying this video, there are plenty more on our channel that you won't want to miss. There's a thin line separating tipsy and drunk. Sometimes you stumble from one directly into the depths of another. Charlotte Brown and Jack Shepard met on OkCupid rather than Tinder, like many others. He invited her back to his houseboat for an evening of drinking, all it could have been. They wanted to do a sightseeing tour of London, but the evening ended in tragedy.
And I took the boat down to around about the Houses of Parliament before turning back. I had, just ordered a bottle of wine and kind of drank that, and then I had some food and another bottle of wine, and left and got a taxi back. To be honest with you, I'm even quite hazy about leaving the restaurant. So my memory is quite hazy of the whole evening, really, because we drank very heavily.
As it often does in cases like this, it comes down to negligence rather than malice. A poorly maintained boat hit a submerged log. Charlotte, like many others, was enamored with the ship. In fact, Jack's sole purpose in buying the boat, he later admitted, was to pull women. He'd entertained just short of a dozen other women on the ship he had bought from Gumtree. However, his using the boat and letting other people use it were 2 very different things. A poorly maintained boat might act unpredictably, but if you're accustomed to it, you might know how to handle rougher movements. Drunk and unable to react appropriately, Charlotte Brown should have not been in the driver's seat that night. She had asked to take control of the vehicle, and Jack allowed it, though that would be the last thing she would ever do. After hitting a log in the water, Charlotte's steering sent them both deep beneath its icy surface. At least, that was the story. Jack was found clinging to the boat's hull, and Brown was later pulled from the water, entirely unresponsive. The Riverside resident had heard the young man crying out for help, but not in the way you might expect. The statement was, he kept saying, help me, somebody help me. It was just, help me, not us or her. Upon examination of the boat, it was found to have several defects, particularly faulty steering. The life jackets had been tucked away and the kill cord was disconnected. But that's not where the strange behavior ends. Jack was actually to be married soon after Charlotte's death. 2 months later, to be exact. Jack had actually gone straight from the police station for his second interview to the registry office to be married to his new wife. He began to live a new life with his wife and soon their child, right on the tail of his upcoming trial. He began to display aggressive behavior soon after his first court appearance, attacking ex-soldier David Beach at a pub in Devon. It boiled down to the stress of marriage and the grief he felt about Charlotte's death. By 2018, Jack told his legal team he wouldn't turn up to the trial, only to immediately cease communications. Not even his legal team knew his whereabouts, though it later came out that he would get daily trial updates and maintained regular contact with his solicitor. He simply disappeared. It took a while, but he did come back. He was found guilty of manslaughter in the trial after running off to Georgia, eventually turning himself into Georgian police and getting 6 years in prison for his part in Charlotte's death. The truth is, the circumstances around the fatal Thames crash are murkier than the water they fell into. Piloting any vehicle under the influence of alcohol is a recipe for disaster, only made worse by Jack's negligent care and maintenance of the boat. His manslaughter charge may finally bring closure to the grieving family, but many decisions must have gone wrong to lead here.